Hello there. I'm going to do a quick little guide lesson thing on adding vibrato to your bends. So you have a bend and you have vibrato, but let's combine the two. Right, that kind of idea where we're doing the bending and adding that vibrato in. The best piece of advice I can give you right off the bat is make sure your guitar is in tune. Make sure it's set up correctly. It's not going to give you trouble as you're learning any technique. Okay, not everybody can afford a Sir Modern or even something like a Fender Mexican Strat. Even not a lot of people can afford that. Maybe they're just starting out, and that's perfectly fine. But do see if you can get it set up the best you can, because that's going to help you a lot. I'm using on this guitar, it's a 25.5-inch scale. So from the nut to the bridge right here where the strings are touching, it's 25.5 inches. And I have a 9.5 to 44 gauge. Is it 44? Yeah, it is 44. 9.5 to 44 gauge strings. And they seem to work pretty well for me. They're right in between a 9 gauge and right in between a 10 gauge, and I like the feel of it. I like the sound of it. Okay, so if you use 9s, it's great. If you go down to 8s, I mean, sure, it's going to definitely make it easier, but just be aware you can still be able to do all of this even with 10s, like Guthrie Govan does. So speaking of Guthrie Govan, number one thing you got to get down for the fundamentals is your bending. So I highly recommend you check out the Guthrie Govan Masterclass and follow it to the T. Follow everything that he talks about because it helps immensely. It even helped my bending and my kind of trying different, kind of realizing the amount of different strengths I need and getting that muscle memory down. And also training your ear. It's very important to use your ear and be able to listen to and figure out what's going to work better than other, fingers or whatever. So very quickly, just some quick tips. Try bending all over the neck. Don't just stick to one spot. Don't just stick to one string. Bend all over the place. Use different strings. Use different parts of the neck because it is going to feel and it's going to react differently. Try using multiple fingers to give you the most strength. So instead of just using one finger, which is almost impossible to do all the time, you want to use all three. I don't care if Kirk Hammett is able to do his middle finger and do a two-step bend. You're not Kirk Hammett. Just be aware that you can practice that on your own time. Just for the sake of consistency and practice, use multiple fingers when doing bigger bends. If you can do 1.5 steps, meaning 3-fret bends on every single string, you're doing really good. That's good enough. But if you want to bend up to 4 frets, 2 full steps, it takes practice, and you want to make sure you don't break any strings along the way. Along with that is the idea that low strings, you're going to bend that way. So the E, A, and D strings, low E, A, and D, you're going to bend that way towards the ground. And the G, B, and high E strings, it's much easier to bend up towards your face, okay? That's going to be the best way to approach it. Vibrato, just follow it exactly the same way as you would with bending, except the idea is that we're not doing big bends, we're doing little bends, micro bends, technically, where we're doing, it's just very little bends, but very fast, so it sounds very even and nice and musical, okay? So try to keep your vibrato even. That doesn't mean you have to do a wide vibrato or a very, very shallow vibrato. You don't want to do, that doesn't sound musical at all. You don't want to do, don't try to be like Zach Wilde with pinch harmonic, whatever, and trying to go all crazy. Just try to develop your normal vibrato and go from there. The best way to describe it is that you want it to be even. And you can do it shallow and fast, or you can do a little bit wider and slower. Or, and of course use different strings, different frets, different areas of the neck with different fingers, and you should be okay. So, going from that, the very first thing I'm going to show you is the idea of what the properties are for doing the bends with vibrato. So the idea is we have for example, B string, right? I'm bending up to the 17th fret from the 15th fret. So it's 2 fret bend, full step bend, and I'm going to add vibrato to that. Similar to that, or maybe a little bit faster or slower. Right? And the best way to describe what I'm doing is you're letting the bend go up, and then you're letting it release a little bit. And then you bend it back up, release, bend it back up, release. So if you're looking at my hand, my left hand here, this is a clear exaggeration, but imagine it's kind of like you're actually adding vibrato, but you're just ever so slightly letting the note come back down from the bend, then back up, then back down, then back up. So it would be something like this if I play it slow. Right, something like that. If I play it very, very slow, it's an where it's just ever so slightly getting flatter, then you sharpen it, flatter, then sharpen. That's the easiest way to start adding vibrato to your bends. And the other way is, instead of letting it come back down, is that you push the note back up. And of course try different strings, different frets, and bend different ways, just to see what will work for you. But the best and most consistent and easiest way is to just let that note fall from the bend a little bit, then push it back up. That's the most easiest, consistent way that will work pretty much almost every single time, at least for me. So, for example, like the A string, I might be doing a bend 12 to the 14, and I'm bending downward, I'm pulling the strings, and I'm using 3 of my fingers, right? I'm using my ring finger, and the idea is that I can do exactly what I was doing before, just letting it release a little bit, then back up, then down, then up. And here, I'm using my ring finger, and then my first finger, and practicing that way. It might even be a little bit easier to do the lower strings rather than higher strings. I tend to find that the A string, D string, and G strings are the easiest ones to kind of do this bend vibrato thing. On the high B, the high E and the B strings a little bit harder, and the low E, it's kind of tough for you to really do, but it's possible, and I do recommend practicing it that way. So the absolute best way to do this is, number 1, get your fundamentals down for bending. Number 2, get the fundamentals down for vibrato, and be honest with yourself for both. You want to be consistent, and you want to be as accurate as you can be, and train your ear a little bit more. And then, as you combine the two, the easiest way to do it is, as you do your bend upward, you let it fall just a little bit, then back up, then down, then up. That seems to work the best. So, for example, here's a little lick you can kind of practice on to practice all 3 of those things, whether it's bending, vibrato, or both. And it will be something like this. What I'm doing there is I'm doing a bend from the 15th fret up to the 17th fret. Add the vibrato. Let the bend come back down, 15. And then 13, 12 on the B. I do a slide with some vibrato. And I do a pull off, 14, 12 on the G. And then slide down to the 10. Some vibrato. And then a bend up to the 17, then back down to the 15, and some vibrato on the B. So very slow, it would sound like this. Okay, and that's a lick, one of the very first licks from Parisian Walkways by Gary Moore. I think Gary Moore had the best, one of the best, along with Brian May, along even guys like Guthrie Govan that could do it so effortlessly. Richie Kotzen can do it also. And it's the idea of adding these very soulful bends and then adding in this aggressive vibrato. And being super deliberate and accurate with it. I think Gary Moore is one of the best. So that's a very good lick just to practice. I highly recommend listening to the song. It's called Parisian Walkways by Gary Moore. And there's very cool performances on there that he did in like Montreux and I think some he did in, I forgot where, maybe the O2 Arena or whatever, where he does that song. It's amazing. So hopefully that helps you out. Let me know if there are any more questions, and just be very patient with yourself, because it isn't something that will happen overnight, though for some people maybe it will. Just be honest with yourself. Try to be as accurate as you can be, and take the time and take the patience to just develop a good refined technique. Because if you keep developing a technique that doesn't sound musical or doesn't really help you that much, it's going to be harder down the line to break those habits. And I'm speaking that from like experience. Vibrato was always one of the hardest things for me, and it took me a few videos I looked up on YouTube and just practicing, listening to the guitarist I wanted to sound like, and trying to replicate that. Okay, that's the best way I can explain that for you. So find guitarists that you like, try to replicate what they do, but then of course you can always add your own fingerprint and your own style to it as you progress. All right, so hopefully that helps you out. Let me know if you have questions.